So in the words of the High Commission of Australia and India, Australia has placed India at the forefront of its international partnerships. Just a decade ago, the kind of strategic closeness we see between Australia and India today would have sounded far-fetched. But today, the relationship has truly blossomed, becoming an anchor in an otherwise turbulent Indo-Pacific. Emerging tech, equitable digital growth, as well as post-pandemic recovery have become cornerstones of the India-Australia partnership and the revival that it has undergone in the past few years. I'm joined today by a brilliant panel. We have Georgina from the High Commission, and the others are, this is not a random assortment of speakers, of course. We are all working on emerging tech areas and the potential for Australia and India to collaborate in some of these. From amongst the speakers, we have represented blockchain, we have folks working on quantum, all under the Australia-India Cyber and Critical Technology Partnership. With that, I wanted to turn to Georgina. What was the thinking behind the creation of the AICCTP program? And as a follow-on to that question, what do you find most exciting about the Indian tech space? And then where do you see the opportunities for Australia?
That's a lot to answer in one question, I think. So when Tricia sent me the description for the panel, she had this lovely phrase in there that talked about the sunrise phase of the Australia-India relationship. And I think it really shows the step up in the relationship in the last few years. And one of the key elements of that has been in cyber and tech. And as everybody in this audience would know, the strategic and economic value of cyber and tech in diplomacy and in international relations is only going to increase in the next few years. And we know that Australia and India are two important democracies and pillars in the Indo-Pacific. So I think it's very, an obvious conclusion to draw that we should be working in this very important space. So initially we signed our comprehensive strategic partnership with India in 2020, and as part of that there was a big commitment under science and technology, and in particular in critical technology. So we use the term critical technologies, but in India it's often referred to as new or emerging or strategic technologies, but it's all sort of the same thing. So there was an MOU signed and we were going to do all this great stuff with India, and then also on the Australia side there was an injection of about 12.7 million Australian dollars for the Australia-India Cyber and Critical Tech Partnership, the AICCTP. And that covers a range of things, but one of the important things that covers is our grants program, which is really to bring together all of the great experts we have in India and Australia in cyber and critical technology to look at the ethical frameworks and standards and policies that we should have as these sort of nascent technologies develop. And what we know is that governments can always be a little bit behind in regulating this space. So how do we get our great institutions, whether it's academics or private sector or think tanks, to look at this and propose a sensible way forward that's informed by our shared values? And I think the broader picture is, Australia introduced its International Cyber and Critical Tech Engagement Strategy at the start of last year. And that's shaped under 3 pillars of values, security, prosperity, very traditional pillars when we're looking at international relations. And when we look at under each of those pillars, there's great strategic convergence with India, whether it's on security or shared democratic values, looking at the sort of diversity that's important in tech, and having gender diversity in the development of tech, and of course prosperity. We know India has great opportunities in the digital economy. And there's also great strengths from both countries, I think, to bring to the table. And we know the India tech story very well. It's a software superpower. It's got amazing tech talent. There's more and more people coming online. India has great swathes of data and great expertise. And from the Australia side, we've got a very strong tech story as well. So we've got some really great researchers. Our Commonwealth Scientific Research Organisation, the CSIRO, was very pivotal in the way that Wi-Fi was developed and does some really great research on a range of things, including things like solar panels. And my colleagues will be able to talk about this a bit more, but we've also got a very strong quantum story to tell as well. There's some really great experts we have working in this space. So there's real strength to bring from both sides, and I think the grants program is really just a little bit of a prompt from government to bring people together to be able to look at these really important issues. And I think your other question was, what's the most exciting thing? I think the answer is everything's exciting. I would say when I came over to India and I thought I'll be working on cyber and tech, I thought, oh, it's sort of a narrow space compared to what a lot of my colleagues cover in the High Commission. But obviously, as soon as I got here, there's just so much exciting things going on, and there's so much opportunity for collaboration with Australia and India.
Thanks, Georgina. And, okay, yes. And of course, the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade is a valuable partner for CyFy as well, so thank you for engaging with us here. Jhalak, over to you. You're working on standards for blockchain tech. There's a pretty complex ecosystem of blockchain applications already in place. In India, some states are already working on integrating blockchain into voting systems. There are a small but growing number of DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations, in both India and Australia, which are companies that don't exist on paper, but just through smart contracts or crowd consensus. Is this tech moving too fast for us to arrive upon common broad principles? Should we start looking at more applications-based principles? Jhalak.
Thanks for that, Trisha. So that's actually precisely what the project that we're doing at the Center for Communication Governance at the National Law University, Delhi, along with the Technology Policy Design Center at the Australian National University, my colleague Johanna Weaver over there, is that we're moving beyond, the broader principles to really starting to look at what do standards, specific standards, look like within the blockchain ecosystem. So I think what we need to think about is blockchain technologies have the potential to fundamentally reshape the way the internet is structured. And depending on the way blockchain technology evolves, this could either enhance or undermine India and Australia's security, economic resilience, and social cohesion. So it's very important for India and Australia to come together at international standards forums and drive discussions and embed, the values that India and Australia as countries hold dear. And there are many, many very common values of rule of law, democracy, good governance, open, free, rule-based sort of internet that become fundamentally important for us to ensure are, voiced at these international forums where standards are being shaped, which will fundamentally shape the way this technology grows, and ensure that other interests do not sort of drive the way this technology finally gets shaped. But it's a sort of a balanced approach. So I think the question that you raise is very important, I think, we need to dig down deeper, which is precisely what our project is doing. Trying to build a community of people across academia, industry, civil society, independent experts, different kinds of stakeholders within the government. Enhance understanding and capacity to engage with blockchain standards, and then bring them to the table and empower them to really meaningfully contribute to these discussions. Because otherwise, we find a fundamental gap in the ability of sort of stakeholders to contribute, let's say the ISO or the BIS, discussions. And it's getting dominated by other players within the global ecosystem.
Thanks, Jhalak. I think your comments kind of really re-emphasize the complexity part of the question. And of course, thank you for taking time off on your day off to join us for this session. Jayson, so Jayson has flown in all the way from Sydney. ORF and University of Sydney are working together on a quantum metaethics project. So my curveball to you, Jayson. What do we mean by meta-ethics? Why meta-ethics? And is quantum so fundamentally paradigm shifting that we need to start questioning what technological goods and bads are?
Is that working? Yeah, cool. So the reason it's meta-ethics and just not plain ethics is within the study of ethics, you've got roughly 3 branches. So you've got applied ethics, and that's, sorry, it might be a bit boring, but that's, what should you do in X situation? Then you've got normative ethics, and those are questions about who you should really be. And then meta-ethics asks larger questions about, what is it to be good, more broadly. And when it comes to quantum technologies, we've chosen meta-ethics over normative ethics or just applied ethics because these technologies promise to be so transformative that we really have to ask ourselves, what does it mean to work towards the social good if society itself has been completely transformed and shifted? I say when these technologies work because at the moment there's no quantum computer that can do things that no other classical computer can do. There's been a few cases where we thought that was the case, but it hasn't really panned out yet. But should they come online in a functioning, useful way, we'll really be left in a situation like we were in the 1950s before computers came online. So that is my answer.
Thanks, Jayson. Not esoteric at all. That was a very well-put answer to that question. Prachi, you've been working on looking into India's quantum ecosystem. You've been traveling to the universities around the country that are working on quantum tech. Where do you think India is in the race for quantum supremacy? Do you see complementarities between India's strengths in this space and Australia's strengths in this space?
Thanks for the question, Trisha. So I think most of us here would be aware that...
Prachi, really sorry, could you move the mic a little closer to you?
Yeah. Am I audible now? Yeah, better. Okay. I think most of us here would be aware that India formally entered the quantum race, so to say, or the race to quantum supremacy in 2020. So in 2020, the Ministry of IT, along with the PSA's office, along with the Prime Minister's Science, Tech, Innovation Advisory Council, they formally announced India's national mission on quantum tech and applications. And they've allocated 8,000 crores, which is roughly $1 billion, towards the initiative. When it comes to the global quantum landscape, although India has promised to invest quite a lot of money, quite a lot of fund into the development of quantum technology and applications, we are still lagging behind. Lagging behind in terms of ground research, in terms of basic fundamental research. And there are a lot of inquiries around what exactly are our quantum aspirations. Do we want to incline ourselves towards applications, translational research, or do we want to move towards foundational science? So these are the kind of questions that we are trying to answer today. And when I visited a lot of these quantum labs in India, and of course I interacted with professors, senior physicists who've been invested in quantum science for nearly 30, 40 years. I also interacted with entrepreneurs who are working in the quantum space, and a lot of students as well. And what I figured out is that not a lot of funds have actually reached the end user, the end researcher, the students, the PhD students, the postdoc fellows. So that's one bottleneck that I think we should probably try to fix as soon as we can. But all hope is not lost, and most people in India, I mean, most researchers who are involved in the quantum space, they're very optimistic about quantum technologies in India. A very enlightening statement which one of the professors in the space, he told me, was that Google was not a search engine when it started off, right? And look where it is today. So just because there are some companies in the West or elsewhere in China or Southeast Asia who are doing well in quantum tech, it really doesn't mean that India can't keep up. So all hope is not lost. When it comes to India's strengths in quantum space, we do have a very strong research base. So quantum tech or quantum computing is merely the application of quantum physics or quantum mechanics into computing. So we already have done a lot of work in quantum mechanics. It's just about translating it into quantum computing. So that's one of the biggest strengths of India right now. And of course, we have a lot of overlap and a lot of symmetry when it comes to the Australian strengths as well. Like we've had this beautiful association with the University of Sydney for over a year now, and we've been working together on the quantum metaethics project, and we can still leverage a lot on the multi-stakeholder ecosystem. We can forge better relationships with startups of both countries, with more student exchange programs, and more scientists actually just collaborating. And of course, we can also, because both Australia and India, they do have strong human resource. They also have a lot of potential for scientific advancement. So both countries can actually leverage on their influence and power within the Indo-Pacific and also strengthen the small island nations. We don't really have to import everything from the West or China. We can have manufacturing units set up in these small island nations, and we can also produce critical quantum components like say quantum chips or even qubits or cryogenic equipment, because quantum computers rely a lot on refrigeration. So we can have those manufactured locally, or not exactly locally, but maybe regionally. We can also develop Indo-Pacific strength in that way.
Thanks, Prachi. And there's an important aspect you brought out in the course of your comments, which is that India's race in this quantum space is happening in the backdrop of US-China competition. And as you mentioned, we have to either import our computers from the United States or China. That geopolitical element also plays in quite a bit. We've been talking about this through our research. A question to both you and Jayson. Do you think in this narrative to build national competitiveness in some of these critical and emerging technology spaces like quantum, conversations about ethics and taking a step back and thinking about governance that works for people, do you think those issues tend to get put on the back burner? Jayson, first you.
Just quickly on the question of like a quantum race, I think if you ask, so we have this like very vibrant discourse saying that there is a race in quantum computing between China and the US. But if you ask the physicists, they don't really see it that way. They're still collaborating across borders. Pretty much all of their papers got open access. So when you say it's a race, you really have to ask like a race for who and who's racing. Regarding whether or not we put important questions in the back burner, yeah, we always do. The issue is that at this stage, if we don't ask these questions now, we'll be left in a situation where these technologies will come online and we'll be utterly ill-prepared for the situation. Yeah, I think that's...
Okay, so your question, it has two elements, and I think it's important that we discuss both of them. One is about quantum supremacy, or the race to developing a quantum computer. In my conversations with academicians or even entrepreneurs or the entire stakeholder system, so to say, is that merely building a quantum computer is not going to suffice. So we can all sit in a room together and build a 5-qubit quantum computer, and it's not going to lead us anywhere. So I don't think just mere quantum supremacy is going to be of any use going ahead. It's what we do out of those capabilities. Do we use them to create a better world, maybe, a more cohesive world, or do we use quantum capabilities against each other? When it comes to the question of ethics, we've discussed it at length, and we've also written a lot about it, is that we need to go back maybe 70 years ago and see what we did with technology, what we did with the first quantum revolution when we came up with the atom bomb. That was perhaps one of the first and foremost applications of quantum technologies. So what did we do with it? Did we build the quantum? Did we build atomic capabilities to harness energy, or did we create conflict? So that's one question that needs to be answered. And I think at the moment we are at that stage, not just India and Australia together, but the world at large. We are at that stage that we can set these conversations rolling in parallel, rather than develop technologies, probably create a monster or something out of quantum tech, and then go back to the ethical concerns of quantum technologies. I think in the past, if you look at AI, we did lose out a lot on these ethical conversations. But I think for all of us here and for the world at large as well, that could be a lesson. And before we formally roll out quantum applications, we should sit down and probably think about the ethical implications of those technologies.
Great. Thanks, Jayson. Thanks, Prachi. And following on Prachi's comment, we do have a panel on AI ethics. So just a quick plug for that. Do tune in for that session as well. My next question is to you, Jhalak. As we look to the next 5-10 years of the Australia-India tech partnership, what do you think is the next big thing in terms of tech cooperation between the two that hasn't already, for example, been covered by the AI-CCTP project?
I think sometimes we're always looking for the next big thing, but sometimes I think it's just about building on the foundation that's already been laid and, really deepening that. I think the AI-CCTP is doing a great job of, initiating community building. So, as in the quantum project, the ORF and University of Sydney are working on, you're building a community of people working on quantum, technologies, bringing people together across industry, academia, civil society, governments, etc. Similarly, in our project on blockchain, we realized, so, we've just in the process of releasing our first report, and we started the project about 6 months back, where we sort of set a baseline. We've measured a baseline of what was the level of understanding and engagement with standards in the blockchain ecosystem. And we realized that while there was, some level of knowledge, there wasn't a lot of capacity to engage. But another really interesting thing we realized is that members of the ecosystem were not talking to each other. Everyone was sort of working in their individual silos. So I think, rather than maybe thinking about the next big thing, I think, in the next 10 years, I think we just need to deepen those relationships, because as relationships deepen, people become more comfortable picking up the phone and calling, hey, did you see this? Did you see the way that played out at this meeting? And can we figure out a way, to work together to ensure that these things get shaped in a way that India and Australia, align with the values that India and Australia so deeply share? And you think that India is sort of this developing country and Australia being a more developed country, that, there would be a lot of differences. For instance, we are looking at applications and use cases of blockchain, social applications, economic applications, security applications. And when, respectively, we went out and did our research and came back to the table, we realized there's so many different overlaps. Despite, being sort of in different categories of development as countries, there's so many different overlaps, and there's more commonality, actually, than there are really differences, and there's so much to learn from each other. So I think it's just about continuing to build on these relationships, continuing to support this ecosystem so it really glows and flourishes, because I think when we invest in that, we're going to see so many intangible and tangible benefits coming out over, I'm not thinking the next decade, I'm thinking the next century.
Just one question. Jhalak, just want to dig into one point that you made, which is that different parts of the ecosystem are not talking to each other, and there isn't an understanding of the tech itself. Is that an issue you see when it comes to blockchain policy as well? There was a theme that came out in the discussion this morning, that tech fluency, whether the regulators are understanding what they're regulating, is an issue. Do you see that in the blockchain space as well?
I think, in the blockchain space, there's been a lot of acceptance from the government and a lot of push within the government for innovation. And in fact, what we found particularly interesting is different states in India at the state level have been taking the lead in pushing for adoption of these technologies, from things from voting to land records and so many other applications. So I think there's a lot of interest. I think what the role that civil society organizations and think tanks like ours need to play is really in helping sort of bridge that gap in understanding of technologies, or really, because, they're really, really smart people, well-intentioned people. But I think it's just that they have so much on their plate and there's so many different things that they're trying to do. Sometimes it's just about, giving them that support and, enhancing their access to the right resources, pointing them to different forums. And then, they are able to really unlock a lot of value and potential for our society, our economy, across states in India.
Thanks, Jhalak. And I think that's a great segue then to Georgina as well, because that was, I suppose, an intent of the project as well, to have research based on which you could make informed policy and decisions about the Australia-India partnership. The same question that I posed to Jhalak to you, what do you see as the next big thing, or perhaps something that you wish the next round of grantees would work on?
That's a very good question and very timely, because we're opening our next round of grants in the next couple of months. So I think watch this space for all institutions interested in applying for that. I think it's so great to hear Jhalak's comments about the strengthening sort of institutional linkages we always talk about, and having those communities around cyber and tech, the policy ecosystems in both systems. So I think one of the next steps for us will be when we establish our joint Australia-India Centre of Excellence on Cyber and, on critical and emerging technology policy, which was announced last year by our governments, and that will be located in Bengaluru, where we're also setting up a new consulate general there. So I think in a similar vein to the grants, it's bringing together government and industry and tech policy experts and academics to look at these issues and really have a strong avenue that is seeking to influence governments and how we think about these things. And sort of to the second question on that sort of tech policy ecosystem, like, these issues are really complex, and for decision makers, they're complex across the board, and having a base of understanding or an ecosystem of tech policy experts, I think it's really well established in India, and there's big think tanks like ORF and a lot of really cool small think tanks coming up and looking at these issues, and of course universities as well, and it's just starting to develop in Australia. So the partner that Jhalak works with, Johanna Weaver at the ANU Tech Policy Design Centre, does some great work about trying to explain these things to decision makers, so politicians understand when they're creating legislation and policies and investing money, what does this actually mean for, say, quantum or blockchain or AI or whatever else it is. And I think, there just needs to be more and more of those conversations.
Thanks, Georgina. We have time for maybe one question, if anybody in the audience has a question. All right. I suppose we would have answered all your burning questions. One question. The mics are on the side.
Am I audible?
Just a little louder.
So, ma'am, when we talk about blockchain, it's decentralization that comes to our mind. So, how do you see that, considering the tech outflow India has, so how do you see that it will affect our tech sovereignty?
I think, tech sovereignty is, are you saying like India's leading role in the tech ecosystem? What are you defining as tech sovereignty? Like,
our technology doesn't differ from what other technologies, like other countries' technologies are.
Right.
We protect our technology that way, security-wise.
So I think, in India, you have a unique set of applications that are being developed that are relevant to the social, economic, and security contexts in India. And I think there's value, actually, in technology flowing across borders and, in sort of applications being developed within the Indian context that are scalable across the Indo-Pacific. Because that's how, society and our economies will sort of move forward, which then lends to the point that you need transparency, interoperability, and scalability of these applications, and which then lends to the point that you need to have effective standard development to enable all of this. So I think there's tremendous value in, India developing applications that can be harnessed globally for social and economic good. And especially, I see a lot of value in sort of the collaboration between India and Australia, because I think, we can, examine use cases, talk about use cases which are scalable and replicable across the Indo-Pacific, and strengthen that community and bring that community together to work together around the shared values that we all have.
Thank you, ma'am.
I have a question for, Trisha here.
Oh, sorry, we are out of time, unfortunately.
Okay,
but
fine.
the speakers will all be here. You can,
No worries.
you can ask your question. I'm really sorry about that. And Jhalak, thanks for your answer to that. The themes you mentioned, which is this balance between building solutions for the domestic market and the sovereignty question versus building solutions that you can then build an international base on, the scalability question. This is also going to be part of some of the conversations later today. We have, of course, a conversation with Minister Rajiv Chandrasekhar, so we'll be answering some of those burning questions there as well. With that, thank you all for your time today. Thank you for joining us.